All right, ProBlend 600 or IGI 6006. Two very popular waxes, both for beginners and intermediate, but which one is better? What do they have in common? And how do they contrast? Before we get started, a big shout out to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Today, I'm going to break down both of these waxes with you. We're going to discuss the differences and some considerations of using each. All of this information in today's video is based off of my own personal experiences of using both of these waxes quite a bit over the last several years. Also, later in the video, I'll be giving you kind of a cheat sheet comparison chart that just kind of summarizes some of the major components and differences between both. But before we even get to that, let's start off talking about what these two waxes have in common. Well, for starters, the most obvious is they are both parasoys, meaning they are a paraffin soy blended wax, which paraffin soy blends have become the most popular wax on the market over the last couple of years. It used to be mostly just all paraffin, but parasoys have taken the market. There are, of course, other wax types as well: coconut blends, palm waxes, all soy waxes, apricot waxes, beeswax, but both of these waxes are considered paraffin soy blends. Now, they do differ in the amount of paraffin and soy, and we will talk about that here in just a bit. Also, both of these waxes have a creamy appearance and texture. That is mostly because they're made up of the same type of waxes, so they have the characteristics of paraffin and soy together, which usually gives that creamy texture. Both of them also hold dye and color very well. You'll get nice, rich, vibrant colors. One maybe a little bit more than the other, but they are still both very vibrant and rich. If you follow me on Instagram and other channels as well, you'll see I use a lot of color in my candles, and I use a lot of both of these waxes, so they both perform very well when it comes to candle dye. Both of them also hold plenty of fragrance oil. 6% up to 10% is really the range that most people work with. And so they do hold roughly the same amount of percentage oil, and they both hold plenty. Also, both of them certainly fall in what I would consider the affordable range of candle waxes. Now, I say that kind of tongue in cheek because recently with the pandemic, the cost of almost everything has skyrocketed, and that really includes candle waxes as well. These two waxes are no exception. They have gone up in price, but all things equal and considered, these are still among the lower and more affordable priced waxes on the market. A lot of your other blends with beeswax and coconut or more soy content, they're even more expensive. So I would consider both of these affordable waxes. Also, both of these waxes are technically considered single pore waxes. Now I say technically in air quotes because there is sort of an exception to this, and I will talk about this when we get to the comparisons of each wax specifically. Both of them are pre-blended waxes, meaning you don't need to add any other additives other than your fragrance oil and dye if you're using any. Now there are optional additives you can add, like UV inhibitor, for example, if you're using colored candles. But for the most part, these are ready to go blended waxes. And then the last really big similarity will be the jar adhesion. Neither one of them have perfect jar adhesion. Neither one of them are really poor. It really just depends on the jar you're using, to be perfectly honest. Wider, shallow jars will have no problem with jar adhesion. Taller or weird shaped jars will have definitely some wet spot looking areas, but for the most part, they behave really similar when it comes to jar adhesion. Okay, so now that we've covered the similarities of these two waxes, let's talk about the differences, and we're going to start with ProBlend 600 and how it differs or compares and some of the advantages and disadvantages of using this wax specifically. Let's start off with the blend itself. It is considered roughly a 50-50 blend of paraffin and soy, but more specifically, it's actually 52% soy and 48% paraffin. That is done so it has a slightly higher soy content. That's really done for marketing reasons and branding reasons more than anything. You can find ProBlend 600 at the Flaming Candle Company. Now, when it comes to pour temperature, many suppliers and sites will recommend pouring around 160 degrees. I actually find in my experience that pouring at a cooler temperature works a little bit better. I shoot between 145 and 150 degrees, and I just tend to get a little bit less shrinkage. I get smoother tops. I don't get as many dips around the wick, and I just overall find that that works better for me. However, that is in part a lot to do with the jars that I'm using. So whatever jar you're using, you'll want to experiment with your own pour temperatures. Now, ProBlend 600 is what I would consider a true single pour wax, meaning you pour your candle, that wax will firm up and settle. As long as you find an appropriate pour temperature, you really don't have to do much work after that. You should get smooth, good looking tops. You're not going to deal with sinkholes or air pockets or anything like that, as long as you follow kind of best practices when you're using this wax. So I would consider this a true single pour wax. As far as hot throw, which is what most people are always interested in when we're starting with candle waxes, I would consider ProBlend 600 to be a moderate or average hot throw. But depending on fragrance oil, you can get superior hot throw. So I would say moderate to average would be for the majority of your fragrances that you're going to use. But you can certainly get great, excellent hot throw if you are selective with your fragrance oils. And there are going to be fragrance oils you find that just don't work that well with this wax as well, but that holds true with almost all waxes. You can always find fragrance oils that don't always perform well. Cold throw, I would also say this is average or slightly above average. The soy content will help with cold throw. Soy tends to give a little bit better cold throw, whereas paraffin usually gives better hot throw. So thinking about those trade-offs and finding that balance is more a matter of personal preference for you as the candle maker. The melt point of ProBlend 600 is around 125 degrees. That is not the lowest. You'll find certain soy waxes like 464 that are lower, but it's also not really on the higher end as well. So 6006 that we'll talk about here in a minute does have a higher melt point. So the consideration of using a wax with a melt point around 125 degrees or in that range is if you do a lot of outdoor shows where it's really hot or you're going to be shipping in a lot of summer heat. You'll want to think about that. Make sure you do some testing to make sure your wax isn't getting too soft or melting too much during transit or when sitting on shelves on display when you're outdoors. Personally, I've never really had too many problems with that, but it is something to consider when you're using this wax. The cure time for ProBlend 600, another popular question. Technically speaking, it's 24 to 48 hours. You can use your candle within that time frame. I always give mine at least 2 or 3 days. Personally, if you can let these candles go about a week or so, you're really gonna have that scent develop a little bit better for you, and I think your hot throw really will improve if you give it those extra days. So what about wicking? Well, fortunately, this is a wax that's pretty easy to wick. Now, of course, that depends on your jar and other factors as well, but for the most part, it's a fairly easy wax to wick, and part of that reason is because there are so many different wicks that do work well with this wax. I use mostly Premier 700s, HTPs, but you can use Zincs and LX and Eco wicks. Now, Eco, you'll want to keep it wicked down. The Ecos will burn fairly hot in it, same with CDs and CDNs, but long story short, you can find a lot of wicks that do work pretty well with this wax. It's all about finding the right size. Last but not least, let's talk about the cost. This is going to change. So at the time of this video, we are still suffering from supply chain issues, logistics issues due to COVID and the pandemic. So costs right now are higher than they typically would be, but I would say that it is still a lower cost compared to most other heavy soy waxes. Right now you can find ProBlend 600 somewhere usually in the range of $88 to $95 per case, which is 40 to 45 pounds. So that kind of gives you a rough idea. And again, that's at the time of recording this video. Now, before we move on to talking specifically about IGI 6006, which is another great wax, let me take a quick moment to tell you a little bit about today's sponsor for this portion of today's video, and that is Skillshare. As a candle maker or handcrafter yourself, or even someone running a business, you might really appreciate the benefits that Skillshare has to offer. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes and members. It's a great place to learn new skills, improve your current skills, and just get inspired. I've taken several classes myself on Skillshare just in the time I've had the membership, classes ranging from social media content creation to running ads or managing your website. And there's just so many classes and courses and things that might interest you and appeal to you. Recently, I've been watching one called E-Commerce Essentials: How to Start a Successful Online Business by Tracy Wallace. The great thing about most of these classes is that they don't just talk about the same fluff and basic info. I mean, anyone can find that anytime, anywhere. These classes go into more depth. They help you with ideas, concepts, questions you might not even know to ask. Truth is, I could spend several hours a day watching this content, so I actually have to refrain myself. They have such a wide variety of topics. There literally is something for everyone. And the best part about it is when you sign up for your membership, you have unlimited access to all of those classes. So you're not paying for a course, you're not paying for a specific class. You get access to all the content you want. Now, the best part is you can have Skillshare free for an entire month. A link to Skillshare will be in the description below, and the first 1,000 people that click that link will get a free 1-month membership to Skillshare. Get 1 month completely free just to dive into the content and watch as much as you can, as much as you want, and see how you like it. And if you do like it, then you can continue. But at the very least, you had an entire month free of unlimited access to all of their classes and courses and things they have to offer. So again, a link to Skillshare will be in the description below. For the first 1,000 people to click that link, get 1 month, unlimited access, free. All right, well, it's time to talk about IGI 6006 and how does it compare and contrast to ProBlend 600. This wax is a 70-30 paraffin soy blend, 70% paraffin, 30% soy. And you can find this wax from nearly any candle supplier. It's a very common, very popular wax, and you can find it almost anywhere. So availability for this wax is definitely an advantage because it is just widely available from many sources. My mouth is really dry for this video, so I apologize if I'm slurring any of my words. Okay, let's talk about hot throw. 6006 has an above average hot throw. I do think it is better than ProBlend 600, but it's not always going to be better. Again, it really does depend on your fragrance oils. It depends on, proper wicking and the size of your candles. All of those factors, of course, affect hot throw. But apples to apple comparison, 6006 will generally give you a little bit better hot throw. It is known to have an above average hot throw, and a lot of that is because of the higher paraffin content. But overall, I've had very little hot throw issues with this wax. If I do, it's usually an issue either of my own because of wicking, or because it's just a fragrance oil that wasn't that great of quality, or it just didn't work that well with this wax. But for the most part, you're gonna find the majority of your oils do work well. As far as cold throw, I would say it's average to maybe even slightly below average. So again, the extra soy content in ProBlend 600 gives it a little bit better cold throw, whereas in this wax, you might get a better hot throw, but I would say average, maybe even a little under cold throw. But if your candle has a lid on it, then really cold throw is almost irrelevant, because when the customer takes a lid off of a candle, you can't help but get a whiff of that fragrance. So I wouldn't really worry about it then. Cold throw to me becomes a much more important factor when your candles do not have lids. So they're either uncovered completely, or maybe they just have a dust cover on them. And that is when you can really see the difference between a candle with a great cold throw versus one with an average cold throw. The pour temp of this wax is a little bit higher than ProBlend 600 as well. I would pour between 160 to 165, again, depending on your wax. And the reason pour temp is critical with this wax is because it does have a tendency to give you some sinkholes occasionally. And depending on the size and the shape of your jar, you may not have any issues with sinkholes or dipping around the wick, but you also might. And the best way to control that is finding the proper pour temperature. I can't tell you exactly what that will be, because it will depend on your situation, the temperature of the room you're pouring in, the temperature of your jars, the size and shape of your jars, of course. But generally speaking, I found around 160 degrees or so to be optimal. But you may find times where you do need to do a little bit of extra work at the end, like with a heat gun to heat the top and smooth out the top a little bit, maybe poke a few holes and fill in with some additional wax. You'll just have to experiment and see what works for you. But I would say this is one area where ProBlend 600 definitely has the advantage here over IGI 6006. Which leads to the next item, and that is single pour. Now, earlier in the video, I said that both waxes were technically single pour. So when I said that in air quotes, that was because I was thinking about IGI 6006. It is technically considered a single pour wax, and for the most part, that is true. But there are times, as I was just describing, that you will either need to smooth it out with a heat gun, or maybe even do a second pour. If you're using unusually shaped or unusually tall jars, you will get some sinkage and some dipping around the wick, and occasionally that makes it technically still single pour, because you don't always have to do a second pour, but it's not as true single pour, in my opinion, as ProBlend 600, if that makes any sense. Now, when it comes to wicking, I would say this is also a disadvantage compared to ProBlend 600. And the reason is because it's a little trickier to wick this wax. There are still plenty of wicks that do work with this wax. It's just not as many of them work well with this wax. And finding the right wick with this wax can be difficult, especially, again, if you're using larger jars. So anything over about a 3¼ inch jar, one wick becomes a challenge with this wax, and you want to move up to 2 wicks. Most people will use HDP wicks, Premier 700 wicks, zinc core wicks. Some people even use CD, LX, and Eco wicks. I'm not a fan of those as much as I am the first three, just because they tend to smoke and soot a little bit more, and it can be a little difficult to find the right wicking. So testing and experimenting is definitely the key to using this wax. Now, if you'd like to check out some of my other videos on the channel, I've got some where I'm making candles with 6006, some where I'm making candles with ProBlend 600. I give tips and tricks to using each of them, and I do discuss wicking as well. The melt point of this wax is also higher than ProBlend 600. ProBlend 600 is around 125. IGI 6006 is around 130 to 133 degrees. Now, that higher melt point does contribute a little bit to why it's more difficult to wick, but it also will hold up a little bit better in heat. So whether you're shipping in hot climates or doing outdoor events in the summer, this wax will hold up a little bit better. It's a little bit firmer with a higher melt point than ProBlend 600. The cost of this wax suffered from price hikes due to the pandemic, but not as much as some of the other waxes. So this is slightly lower priced than ProBlend 600. However, I don't know that that's always been the case. At the time of this video, 6006 is a little bit better price point than ProBlend 600, but it's still relatively close. You can find this wax usually in the range of $78 up to $85 per case, which again is another 40 to 45 pounds. And that is a breakdown of these two waxes, what they have in common, how they differ, and some of the advantages and disadvantages of each. Now, which one do I prefer? Because I know everyone is probably wondering that question. It's a really, really tough decision. I think it just depends on a few factors and which one's most important to you. I do think you can get a little bit better hot throw with your 6006. However, ProBlend 600 is easier to work with. Which one of those is more important to you? Which one do you prefer? I really can't answer that question for you. That is why even still today, I use a combination of both of these waxes. In all fairness, I use a lot of different waxes for different purposes. Some of those waxes I use just for the purpose of this channel. Others are just for certain customers, but I use both of these two waxes the most, and I've always had a tough time choosing between them. And I think the key is just getting comfortable with one. So use both, get good at using each one, and figure out which one you just tend to like a little bit better. I'm gonna leave you with a chart here up on the screen, but I will have it available later to check out online as well. And that is just a kind of a brief summary comparison chart of these two waxes, which one I give the check mark to, and let you kind of decide from there which one maybe you're leaning towards, either to try or maybe just for fun. Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone. Give this video a thumbs up. It really helps me out here on the channel, as well as subscribe if you're not already a subscriber and you're interested in more content about candle making or running a candle business. At the very end here, YouTube is going to recommend another one of my videos for you to check out here on the channel. So if you decide to do that, then I will see you here shortly. Thanks.